Yo, what's good? Welcome back to another Sit Down with Skriv, with me, Skriv. How's it going? Today's guest is Jamada. Maybe if you're from the CS scene, right, you might not be too familiar with the name. I would imagine a lot of the viewers so far, by virtue of what I do and the guests that I've had on, right, have been from the CS scene. But Jamada is from the League scene, particularly the UK League scene, League of Legends, that is, if perhaps you live under a rock. But nonetheless, he is a great guy, a colour commentator within that scene, but he has been a coach, an assistant coach at some pretty high levels, I would say, particularly within the UK scene, but also within, I believe they call it the ERL, the kind of tier 2 European scene as well. And now he's transitioned into commentating that same kind of area. So really intriguing journey of how he got there, people that he's learned from, and things that he's drawn from coaching. Of course, these are all questions and topic areas that we get into. But I wanted to keep this intro short and sweet, try that out, see how people feel with that one. Maybe we'll use that whole little intro line, tagline a few more times. I don't know. Still testing the water with everything. Of course, that studio, very, very expensive, so we had to do without it for this episode, unfortunately. But maybe in future it will make a return. Either way, enough from me. Without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right, welcome everybody to another Sit Down with Skriv. We are joined today by Jamada, good friend of mine, League of Legends colour commentator, and an awful lot before that, of course, which we are going to break into, but it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite and you giving me your time.
Yeah, no problem. Right back at you, mate. But yeah, just to start off, as I do with most of my guests, could you give us a brief rundown of your history within the League scene?
Well, within the League scene, right down to the very bottom, I guess, my first sort of minor introduction was doing Belong like 3 or 4 years ago, because I mention Belong now because you actually do get a fair few Belong players end up playing in like tier 3, like the UKL, and then eventually sometimes go on to UKLC. So yeah, I started coaching Belong with a couple of my friends. They made the team whilst I was kind of away, and then I came back, and I didn't really want to kick anyone off the team so that I could play. So I just decided, hey, I'll coach it instead. And then that was kind of a thing for a few years. And then I was introduced to a fellow named Ego Speed. If you're any familiar with the UK scene, then you know about Ego Speed. And then he kind of brought me into the UK scene in terms of like just sort of mingling with new players. That was kind of back end of 2018 into 2019. I started sort of being a little bit vocal on Twitter, and sort of like vocal spectator on the UKLC is what I'd say. And then I started just mixing with more and more people, and then eventually come summer that year, I got a trial offer from M&M as one of the assistant coaches on the UK roster. Naturally, I had to accept. Before that, I was also doing coaching for a brand new org called, I think they were Lionhearts at the time. Now they're called Lions Creed. They were trying to break into the UK scene. They didn't quite do it. But yeah, I got my M&M offer. I couldn't turn that down. I spent 3 splits there. So summer 19, spring 2020, summer 2020, as the head coach. And then during that time, I got really comfortable with casting. And then very recently, the casting has taken over coaching for me. It's become my primary.
Yeah, indeed. I think we did a little bit together, didn't we, on the UKEL, and around that time, I want to say you were still kind of wearing both hats.
Yeah. It was kind of a weird. It was a weird thing to make a choice on for me, because both roles kind of overlap, but in different senses. So at least the way that I kind of look at the color commentary role, I feel like there's some sort of emphasis on having to sort of educate your viewers and your audience, whilst also, of course, retaining, that sort of high level of engagement, entertaining, all of that kind of stuff. And for me, as being a caster kind of met more criteria goals for what I wanted to do out of esports, right? Because at the core of it, for me, I just kind of wanted to educate, but I also know that I can occasionally be a funny fucker. So, like, casting naturally kind of just fit, like the shoe fit more than coaching for me. So, after summer of last year, I kind of just made the decision. All right, cool. I'm just gonna try and get into casting full time. Any way that I can, I'll take anything. Fortunately, because I've been casting for so long, things like UKL with you as well, Skriv. I got asked to come and do the UKLC relegations of that split. So I went from coaching summer 2020 to technically casting the very last games of summer 2020. And then the last winter, like a month or 2 months after that, I was invited on to the NLC Full because there was a spot there, and I had a blast. And apparently the DreamHack folks think I did a fantastic job because they let me come and do the UKLC afterwards. Orcs as well really helped me out in terms of getting me there. And then I'll occasionally be on the NLC too, because I assume of how I did with everybody on the NLC Full.
So, having done both the coaching and the casting, what for you? I think you touched on it a little bit there, sort of getting into it. But what for you would you say are some of the key parallels that you've experienced between the two roles?
Two parallels. Well, I think obviously you said I touched on it, so I'll hit on that note first. It's definitely sort of the education-esque side of it. One thing for me, I enjoy teaching people new things. Like sometimes it'll be like niche if I just know some random trick. Sometimes it'll be more general like life skills or whatever, right? But when it comes to League, I've always enjoyed like teaching like my friends and then eventually just players in general, concepts, ideas, yada 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 yada. So getting to the casting side of things, that's the first big parallel, I think. Being able to sort of talk about on air some concepts which not all casters might touch on in the way that I do, because I've spent the last like year, give or take, breaking things down in that way with players. And now that I've moved into casting, I've not really changed necessarily how I break those kind of things down. So I think that's the first big parallel. Second parallel, so far, I think the second biggest parallel is probably just the interaction with players and sort of staff as well. It's not really changed. You still want to learn new things regardless of what role you're in. I feel like, at least. So that sort of same level of communication hasn't necessarily changed. But I think that's probably the main two. Other than that, the roles are definitely quite different. Because as a coach, you're kind of, you feel responsible for your 5, 6, if you've got 2 subs, 7 like players, plus your staff. But as a caster, you kind of more or less feel more responsible for yourself, your performance, and then also trying to uplift your co-caster or co-casters or co-analysts. So I guess that could technically end up as the third parallel, is you feel like you want to try and bring everyone up around you.
Yeah. Certainly, I think it's a really interesting area, because it's something that working a lot more in the CS space, we're starting to see at the moment pro players, right? Like older pro players move into analysis, and then some color commentary in place of Sponge, for example, is a massive name in CS, and he has just announced alongside Machine a few days ago that they're going to look to try and go for casting work, where he's been an analyst for 4, if not 5 years, I think, at this point, but certainly solidly established for like 4 years, right? So I think it's really interesting to see the things that you can learn from having played, having coached. And he was like an in-game leading voice, for example, right? And a lot of the analyst types that Dabble or others like Maniac and Pimp, for example, are two big names in the CS scene. They were more like leading voices or supportive players within their teams, not necessarily like the stars, as it were, the massive fraggers, as we'd say in CS, and that kind of thing. So I think it's interesting to look at those kind of parallels and the areas and the things that you learn from coaching. I guess we've had a little bit of this one as well, but I just wanted to ask, like, what in the end for you do you feel caused the shift? Is it because you were able to like better educate and everything, or maybe just down to logistics of getting more casting work, or is there something there that really drives you when it comes to casting?
Oh, there's a lot. I think the biggest one for me is definitely like content freedom. I've not quite yet sat down and thought about what kind of things I want to make and whatnot, but
yeah,
when you're tied down to a team contract, there's certain things you can and can't do, right? Because you're representing a brand at the end of the day. And whilst when you're working for big TOs on events or leagues, whatever, you're still technically representing their brand even when you're not on air. I feel like the team contracts are a little tighter, right? Like there's just less things you can do and say, whereas when you're not tied down to a team and you still want to make content on that league, you can be a little more like free flowy. You can kind of say more what you want without necessarily getting that same level of like potentially like negative energy back, just because it might be seen as like cocky or hot-headed because you're competing amongst those people. So like freedom of content, kind of, or more. I don't want to say like freedom of speech as if it's like stopped from saying anything, but in that kind of vein of being able to say kind of more what's on your mind a little more freely. Though you can always do it if you really want to. It's just about whether your team is going to be okay with it. So that's definitely the big first one. And then I think just overall enjoyment, really. As I've spent more time casting over the last sort of 18-ish months, I've come to realize I definitely enjoy like being on air, like being able to sort of have that half interaction with whoever's watching, right? Because I've been watching competitive league now for about 6 years. So if I'm on air and I'm casting something and I see something happen, I kind of feel like I already know, much like many casters, right? Because many casters have been watching competitive league for ages, but because it's kind of a newer thing for me, you kind of already know how people are going to react when you see whatever nonsense happens on your screen. So it feels kind of nice to be able to relate as a spectator, and then naturally as the person casting it. So like kind of just like being on air, I suppose, is and being able to interact with more people. I think the wider reach that you naturally kind of have, because I think the main difference as well, because you touched kind of on logistics, is in terms of just like social media growth. Unless you're like crazy good at social media, as a team coach, unless your team's social media game is on point, you're kind of only reaching that team's like reach, right? That's kind of the biggest reach you can get. But if you're part of the broadcast team, you have more people you can technically speak with and influence with, because it's the whole league that you're talking with. It's not just like the team's fan base or their own viewer base. It's the whole league's viewer base. So it feels nice to sort of, in that sense, be able to talk to more people.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some reasons there that like kind of resonate with me as well. You know, and certainly having done a little bit of league, right? And I would definitely say you've done a hell of a lot more. But you can see, I think it is a nice community doing the UK EL stuff. I did some Newell stuff and whatnot. That sort of UK scene in my case, obviously you've maybe had a bit of reach slightly further than that with the NLC and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a lot of that unspoken interaction in a way, if that makes, like, you don't directly address, but you're still kind of having that good time together.
Yeah, it's it's like you get to enjoy the moment with the people watching when you're watching games. Whereas whilst you can probably still do that as a head coach, I certainly didn't find the way. Or as coaching stuff, I certainly didn't find the way. So it's more about that, yeah. So like kind of overall enjoyment, being able to interact with more people, like content freedom. There's kind of loads of there's probably more things that I'm not even thinking about right now that kind of pushed me in that direction. But yeah, I think I mean I guess as well the main thing is I've definitely developed my articulation skills, right? The way that I speak a lot more, like over the last sort of 2-ish years, or kind of 3, because that's how long I've been coaching for. Because I had to properly help people understand sometimes things that I was saying. So if I'm talking in a really stupid way, or I'm not actually able to break things down to lower the barriers to entry in terms of like casting, because League of Legends, for example, it's a really high barriers to entry game to spectate if you don't know about League of Legends, right? You can always sit down and watch CS, for example. It's why I think CS is such a successful like esports, because it's an arena shooter. It doesn't, you don't have to understand much about CS to understand what's actually going on in CS, right? Whereas with League of Legends, it's a very in-depth game. So you have to be able to, I feel like as a commentator, find this balance of breaking down things so that newer viewers might or newer players might understand what you're actually talking about, but not lose the high end, because I can definitely see when people like on air will dumb things down like too much. You will have this situation where the higher end players, and you will normally have the higher end players be the viewer base, right? Especially in the ERL leagues like NLC or Germany, France, Spain, whatever. You don't want to lose that level of engagement from the higher end players, because those are kind of the ones that you want to be engaged with you as well. You want to hear their ideas back on how you're talking about the game too. So there's definitely that aspect to it, I feel.
Yeah, they tried, didn't they? I think for is it This World's maybe the one before, but like there was a very simplistic
right.
broadcast, right?
Yeah, there was I don't know how it was put together, but there was the Red Bull broadcast of the finals. I forget who was on there. I think it was Cadrel. I want to say, if my memory serves me right, Angel Archer, G2's analyst, and then somebody else was definitely there. And it was just sort of a really easy to watch broadcast if you hadn't watched much League of Legends. And it did pretty well as well, like alongside the World's Finals, which I think was the thing that might surprise some people, but it actually pulled decent numbers, all things considered. So there was that. But I think there was also away from the World's tournaments, I think there was one split where they actually ran 2 entirely separate broadcasts. I think it was in an A though. I don't think it was here. They ran 2 separate broadcasts where I think it was primarily Freak on those casts, where he would break the game down in more simplistic ways so that if you were new to League, you could actually understand it. Because like I said, the barriers to entry are quite high. If you haven't played League of Legends, it's going to be confusing. And I doubly know this recently because my family have started getting into watching me work, whether it's because it's easier for them to watch on like BBC Sport if it's the UKLC, as opposed to like going through all the Twitch like hurdles and stuff like that. Even though Twitch is simple, but you know, family technology sometimes it doesn't always mix. And I definitely think the most common thing I've heard from them is, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what you're talking about, but you talking about it makes it kind of easier to understand. But also it's you, so I'm here to watch you, but I have no idea what's going on, but thank you for trying your best to make things easy to understand.
I definitely got that a little bit earlier on as well. Like you say, CS is maybe slightly easier to understand, but all the same, I mean, when parents have like no interaction with gaming at all, I think it's still a little bit hard to follow. You mentioned articulation being a skill that you've kind of picked up from coaching, brought into casting. Are there any other skills you reckon that like you built up while you were coaching that you've been able to transfer across?
I think articulation was the main thing. Making sure that I had a wide vocabulary to avoid things like litany or just I was gonna say repetition, but repetition is litany. So there you go. That's a good example of me making sure I'm good on that. So just I think articulation is the main thing. I think the biggest difference in that is the way that I'll present my points.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're coaching, you have to present your points in a way where your players will then have to apply what you're talking about. Whereas, viewers on a cast watching a league, they might not have to actually apply what you're talking about. Though it's still nice to break it down so that if they are genuinely interested in what I'm talking about, they might say, hey, this guy was talking about something interesting. Maybe I can apply this to what I'm actually doing in my games too. Or even like, I guess it also applies to staff too, because I've kind of got that, I don't like coach mentality still when I cast. You might hear me get mad about certain things on cast, which other casters might not if they weren't coaches before they turned into casters. Because it was sort of drilled into me, and then I would eventually drill into players I'm working with certain like things. Like I think the first week of the UKLC, one of the big things I've spoken about a lot is river control for neutral objectives, and then controlling chokes, which it's a big deal in League of Legends. I'm not going to try and turn this into a whole coaching session, but it's just a really basic thing that a lot of teams don't like respect. So it really does kind of like jar me. It really does piss me off when you will see teams just not respecting these very easy to apply things in game. So yeah, articulation, because that was the original point of the question. And then in terms of other skills, I guess it's kind of linked to articulation, but my actual conversational skills, I think, I had to develop a lot. Even though I feel like I was quite good at holding conversations before I was a coach, I think being able to sort of empathize and understand the player's point of view also kind of helps build that kind of conversational skills. Because I think you need really strong conversational skills to be a solid caster. Because at the end of the day, you're very rarely casting games by yourself, right? You've always got a partner or you've got two people. So knowing how to conversate and flow conversations is definitely important. So I think those like conversational skills, but then also presentation in your like how you're actually speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, depends from game to game. But I'd say League is kind of up there with some of the downtime that can occur where you need to still be kind of like, making your points, but also keeping it entertaining and possibly throwing in a bit more of that like conversational casting in places.
Yeah. Like you say, League, I mean, you can get 4-5 minutes sometimes of just nothing. So, it's fun to be able to turn League games temporarily into short podcasts. And it, like you say, you have to be able to keep, the conversation strong, but then also engaging and entertaining, so that viewers don't just like fall asleep because there is nothing going on in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge, for sure. So when it comes to kind of like the analysis points, the crux, I suppose, of being a color commentator, what are some of the things that you and you have alluded in places, right? Again, with mentioning chokes and things like that. But what are some of the key things that you tend to focus in on that you find super important?
In terms of like League of Legends, like what I feel is important and what do I like focusing on a lot? I think one thing, though I've more recently done this because I've spent a lot of time with Pad, who if you don't know Pad, he's been a coach in the RL system for a little while. He just made it to the LEC with Mad Lions, so he knows his shit. He's a very smart guy. And a lot of my in-game philosophy comes from Pad because that's who I spent the start of my 2020 with. And then the next split, I went on to be a head coach. So I was very inspired about how I look at the game because of how he looked at the game.
Right.
So more recently, because of that, and a lot of the time that I've spent with him, like how teams actually use minion waves, I'll try and focus on that a lot. Whenever it's like applicable, because I think sometimes in the UKLC, you do have teams that kind of just don't use minion waves in like some creative ways that you can. And then the other thing, as also a player who's a jungler, like jungle efficiency. Like I will often focus on the jungle matchup a lot because the jungle is a very important role. And I mean, if you're part of the League community, you know the stigma around the jungle role, and how oppressive it is. So I like to focus in on it a lot because I know it's something that's always the focal point of a lot of conversations when it comes to like role strength in this game. So like how junglers path, and then also sort of use of minion wave, I would probably be my answer. That's why I focus on, or I'm trying to focus on when it's applicable, because again, UKLC teams, they don't like to use their minion waves a lot. So hopefully I can get more examples of that as the split goes on.
Do you think there's like a reason why they don't pay as much attention to it? Is it just one of those things that falls by the wayside, or?
I think it's just to do with like level of play, right? It's still tier 2. You don't have a lot of coaches in this league that pay attention to some of these things, which to me now it's like, oh my god, it's basic. But like a year ago, me would not have applied these things. So it's
Right.
it's not like I'm trying to be like super condescending when I say it, because coaching, anytime you learn a new concept in coaching, it's like, oh my god, I already knew this, but I wasn't applying it. That's not, at least that's the experience that I've always had. It's like, wow, this makes so much immediate sense. This should be what I'm doing anyway. But I wasn't. But then once you learn, oh, I wasn't doing this, you just immediately go, right, now I have to apply it all of the time. So when it comes to the reason, I think a lot of the teams don't necessarily have coaches that will be able to cover all of these things. You know, the split is very short. These aren't always the first things that come to mind when you're coaching a team. Like, for example, my team last split didn't quite get to that stage. We had a bit of a hiccup in the mid split where we weren't able to scrim for about 2 weeks. So they kind of dropped all of their momentum. And even though we spoke a little bit about how we wanted to use waves and yada yada, I don't want to go on too long about wave manipulation in League of Legends. Right. We didn't quite get there because we lost all of our momentum. And if I can't necessarily apply that to a team, and I've been sitting on the pad who's now an LEC coach, I don't expect other coaches to be able to give their team that knowledge at UKLC level all of the time. So that's probably why, because it's very, like, it's basic, but in the same breath, it's not, it still has to pop up in your mind that it's actually something that you can use very frequently.
Yeah, I suppose you have to hit the nail on the head with it as well, right? Get it correct. Yeah. But certainly as a player, I mean, I don't know, I'm very, 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 very basic for me. So I'm sure, indeed, like you say, if we start talking about it, there's probably a good couple hours just based on that.
Yeah. You if you wanted to, you could really long out a conversation like that.
Yeah. You're kind of talking, I think, and touching on like areas that once it comes to light, once you realize these things, they're a little simpler, so to speak, than perhaps first meets the eye. What's maybe some advice, I guess, like technical advice within the game, let's go with, that you wish you had when you first started as a coach, particularly?
As a coach, document everything. Document everything. Pay more attention to what's actually going on in every player's perspective, because I think if you like, I don't want to bring up specific scenarios, but if you're focusing on one area of a game as a coach, right? Whether it's Dragon, Baron, Herald, whatever, make sure you're looking at what every player's doing. You know, there's loads of resources out there to help you stats, so you can see what teams are the best at doing certain things, right? Like over in Korea, the best two teams, actually just in the world, but they just happen to be from Korea. Damwon and Genji are probably the best herald takers in the world. So if you want to learn about how to teach your team how to take heralds, go sit down and watch them and see how they do that, right? Or if you just flick the stats on like Dragon Control, I don't know who the best team in the world is at Dragon Control, right? But let's just say, for example, it's G2. Go and watch how G2 set up every single dragon, right? First, second, third, fourth, if they're like going for clean sweep, soul like points, or just from like any stage, right? Look how they set up their early game, look how they set up their mid game. Late game dragons are a little more complicated, but look how they set them up. Look at every single player's point of view, and then write it down. See if there's patterns, trends. I think that actually that's it. Patterns and trends. That's the most important thing. Pick up patterns and trends and see what the best teams are doing, and try and understand why it works. That's more or less the advice I'd give myself, because that it would make life it would have made life so much easier. I think is the end point in sort of growing as a coach.
Do you think, like, because this is certainly something with the amount of teams and tournaments and like money available in CS, I think certainly some teams on the come up, as it were, you know, trying to break through and whatnot, try and perhaps be like a little bit too original, if that makes sense. Like, you know, coming up with their own way to approach the game and all that sort of stuff. Do you think, kind of from what you're saying, like it's more effective to just not necessarily like full on copy or whatever, but to really try and heavily emulate those better teams to begin with?
I think at first it's good. There will come a point though where you have to realize you're not those players. You're not that team. You don't have all of those facilities around them, the resources, and just like plain and simple, you won't be better than some of these players around the world, right? It is their full-time job to be really fucking good at this game. So, you know, I think from a coaching perspective, at first, learn and understand why what they're doing works, and then if you're actually on a team, apply it, see how it lands, and then from there you can very easily start to make your own refinements if the refinements are necessary. And that's kind of how I feel like coaching philosophy in general should or does work. Like in my case, like I said earlier, even though I had my own base understandings of how I thought the game should be played, when I teamed with Pad taught me a lot, and I moved his ideas forward as best as I could, because I'm not Pad. The guy is genuinely he's kind of a bit of a genius, and I did my best to move those ideas forward. But I think what was really cool was after that split, because the NLC split was still going on, and my split finished like a whole month before his. So he was like, "Hey, do you want to just come sit in with us on the team and see like how we're doing, or you can just help me out?" Because he still had that like faith and trust in me and my ability, which I said yes to. And it was really cool to see how he had developed his philosophy versus how I had essentially adopted and then continued to adapt his philosophy too. So that really is the key, I think, is just like, you don't want to copy one for one what some of these best teams are doing,
right?
From start to finish, but it will almost always be a good foundation as long as you're drawing from like strong teams in that, like that specific aspect. Like I said, you know, if you want to learn about heralds, go and sit down and watch Genji and Damwon. If you want to learn about like I mentioned G2, I think one of G2's strongest strengths is like rotating rotations in the mid game and cross map plays. So if you want to learn about cross map plays, go and sit down and watch every G2 game anytime that they give up an objective and see what they actually take back for it. So stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Like how that can come about, I think, and the way that you mold, someone else's prototype kind of thing, and work off of it. You've certainly mentioned a lot about Pad though as like a clear inspiration as a coach. When you move into the commentary stuff, who are some of the people that in well, I suppose in all of esports, doesn't necessarily have to be in League, but who are some of the people that you gain inspiration from and learn lessons from to apply to your own casting style?
Super easy, Papa Smithy. It's not even remotely close. I absolutely loved this guy when he was still casting in Korea.
Yeah.
There's the other obvious ones, and they too actually came from Korea, but Monte Cristo, and how have I forgotten his partner?
Doa,
thank you. God,
Yeah.
that's like actual blasphemy. I apologize. Monty and Doa, obviously as well. They eventually, once they left League of Legends, I think they did they do some CS? I feel like they did some CS.
Yeah, I mean, moved over to Overwatch, and then
I know. Overwatch. I definitely know.
Yeah. They've dabbled. Monty is pretty well in with a company called Flashpoint, and then Doa, I think, helped them out with the first season,
right?
But second season, I'm not entirely sure. He wasn't on the broadcast team, whether he was behind the scenes somewhere. I'm not 100% sure. And then, of course, the global situation, you never know. Maybe he was meant to be involved, but yeah. So they have done a little bit. They have done a little bit of CS.
Yeah. So they're talented guys. But Papa Smithy, by far and away my biggest inspiration. I think the way that he was able to break down games, and like I've said a lot, I think sort of lower the barriers to entry for newer viewers while still being able to keep the engagement high for the higher end of the ladder. I think it was really, really impressive. And at least for me, whilst there's still plenty of really strong and solid color casters out there, none to me personally have ever quite met like peak Papa Smithy. So definitely Papa Smithy. And there's a couple of other good like color casters, but he was definitely my my main inspiration. Honestly, maybe even like getting into casting, he was one of the reasons why I saw it as like a cool thing to maybe even think about.
Yeah, I mean it's completely solid. Like I watched a lot of League, but around his time, but more so interestingly enough, the NALCS, never really massively interested in EU and stuff like that. So I suppose when I tuned in would see him at Worlds. But certainly I think the mark that he's left, and obviously he's had a few appearances since and stuff like that, is massive.
I'll never be able to forgive 100 Thieves for robbing this man from the commentary world, but I'm sure I'm sure he's happy doing the whole managerial stuff. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left.
Yeah, it happens. We've Henry G is a big inspiration for me in CS, and he's recently moved to Cloud9 in a very similar role on that GM and stuff. Is that maybe something that like you have as a bit of a goal? Maybe like in this is big picture.
Maybe
so,
big picture stuff. Yeah. It more or less depends on where this journey takes me, right? Like if it's super successful, I don't know, 3 or 4 years time, I'm at Worlds casting with all of the great people on the circuit now. Then maybe on the back end, it's like, okay, sure, I'll look into it. Like maybe GM work is something I'm interested in. Maybe I end up like starting my own organization. I don't know. It really depends
the dream.
Where the dream, right? It depends where I go. But I think for a while I want to stick in commentary because I'm still really young too. So I don't know. Not that the GM role is necessarily tied down to seniority, but at the same time, you usually don't see inexperienced or young GMs, right? Normally, they are sort of on the older side of experience when it comes to esports. So, bigger picture, maybe. Long term though, I wanna commentate and cast for as long as I can, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? And experience is important in that role. I don't think it's massively controversial to say as well. It's kind of difficult from what I've seen in CS and from what I know of 100 Thieves in League. It's not been an easy ride for
it's been
the
very
teams.
bumpy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not as easy as it looks. Maybe to continue, I get that I could be like catching you off guard a little bit here. But what, not necessarily names, but what kind of like team would you look to build? What sort of, strengths would you focus on in terms of role players and things like that?
Oh. So like if I was to build a team now, like what would I prioritize?
Yeah. Like I say, not necessarily names, I mean, if you want to include examples of in the current, playing field and whatnot, fair enough. But I just thought it'd be an interesting thought experiment, maybe.
I'm not really sure. I'd have to sit down and think more at length. If you're talking about like roster to take on the world, you've got probably a few good options there. If you're talking about kind of maybe sort of bigger than that, organizations that I think do a really fantastic job at just being organizations. Teams like I think Fnatic and G2, like the way that they interact with their fans is fantastic. It doesn't really get much better than that. You have a couple of good other teams in NA. I think C9 probably the best example of how to social media. And then I suppose a lot of the NA teams are okay. You don't really have you've got the better ones and the worst ones, but I don't necessarily think the NA teams on the whole are like bad. You definitely have some very quiet EU orgs though. For example, I never see teams like Vitality pop up on my feed ever. And it might just be because I don't follow much of Vitality, but I feel like if they were really super active, they would still end up on my timeline because of who I still follow. But yeah, I think for me, if I was to build a team or an org for a team, who knows? It really depends on the year, I guess. But like the bigger picture org, I think the most important thing would just be interaction with, org to fan interaction, and making sure that it's a healthy community, more or less, is the bigger goal to the picture.
Yeah, I think you've played that well, because I think it was a bit mean of me to just pull that one out. It's quite a deep question. But I was just kind of wondering if it's something that you've had a deeper thought about. But yeah, I think certainly social media, that kind of interaction, is really important, and arguably something that the league space does the best, I would say. And I think a lot more of the community as well tend to be on Twitter and whatnot, ready to go, so to speak. Like all the was it like in the last rounds of the ERL and stuff, the guy with the thumbs up or whatever and the massive like biceps sat at the I have no idea where that came from, but I still kind of do you know which one I'm talking about?
I think I do.
Was there like a thumbs up, or was he like holding a gun maybe or something? I think might have been part of the meme.
I'm not too sure. I think it was thumbs up. I don't think it was a gun, but maybe it was.
Okay. Maybe that was some kind of combination of two memes that I saw. But either way, I wasn't really following it. Obviously, I follow some of the talent and stuff, and a couple of the major teams and whatnot. But that was everywhere, and it spread, higher than I think it was around the time of the EU Masters, right? So it spread higher than that to the organizations who weren't really involved and all that kind of stuff. So you certainly see a lot of this super interactive community from League for sure.
Yeah, the League of Legends community is kind of strange, though, I think, compared to others, because it's somewhat split into like, and someone brought this up to me, and I thought about it, so that's why I'm saying it now, because I think it's relatively true, in the sense of it's kind of split between like the Reddit, the Twitter community, and then kind of just the more casual watchers in general. Whereas I don't know how necessarily true that is um for other esports and titles in general. But in League of Legends, I think it's almost defined. Like you can kind of just see almost the entire difference between Reddit community, how they react to things, Twitter community, how they react to things, and the casual viewers are just the casual viewers, right? They just kind of exist, but they're still the main bulk of who's tuning in.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say that the split is certainly there in CS. It's kind of hard to sort of quantify in a way, because I think as well in CS there's another sort of community that's like the betting community on our like smaller tournaments and stuff like that, obviously because of Valve's hands-off approach and stuff like that. So but I'm not afraid to admit, I think socials has been like a weak part of my game kind of thing. So it's kind of hard to
same up
get
until
it right
very recently.
Yeah. If you're a guru on social media, like it's invaluable. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you know how to, if you know how to manipulate social media, if you know how to get algorithm stuff, or sometimes you just gotta have a creative mind, right? Sometimes you just whack out bangers, and that's just how it is. And for some people, they could put out bangers every day. For some people, it's like once a week. For other people, it's once a month. For others, it might just be once a year. Like in my case, I have funny ideas a lot, but a lot of the time I kind of think, okay, is this crossing a line? Like I have to kind of read the room, and sometimes I'm kind of scared. I'm like, I'm sure everyone would find it funny, but would the professionals find it funny? And that's kind of like that's kind of the risk reward, I guess. But if you're already in a relatively blessed position where it's like, it won't really affect you, then you can just pop off and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the like bigger names in like the CS side of things are a little anonymous, Not that they're always posting controversial stuff, but I think it does help them.
It's
in
not
case
even like
they do or whatever,
Yeah, it's not even necessarily like always controversial. But a lot of the time, you're more or less worried that what you might put out turns into something controversial.
Yeah. Or you piss off the wrong person, and
you
then
piss off
suddenly
and then it turns
someone
into
with
a
a big following agrees with them.
Yeah,
and you kind of lost the fight or whatever.
Yeah, like numbers advantage, bro. What can I say? It's not always the way forward. And you definitely do see it a lot. Some members of any given community really will always be more vocal than others in picking up on points that they might just see on their timeline. And depending on their own take on it, you either get loads of love, loads of hate, and yada yada. Again, like you might be really creative. Like in my case, I feel like I probably think of maybe one pretty funny thing like every other week, something like that.
Yeah.
But I have to think, okay, how does this look externally? Even though I know it might be like fucking hilarious, how would it actually do? Does that make sense? If that makes sense. So you just kind of have to watch what you say in that sense. But sometimes you won't necessarily have to. But I think it's more about the expected reception to it. Because I don't know, sometimes you might say something that is funny, but to that one person, might not be funny, and then it can turn into its own thing. So there's always that kind of risk, I guess.
Yeah, I think it just kind of sounds like we both need like a focus group to work with, you know, something like that. Maybe there's some kind of a company out there probably being formed as we speak, you know.
Yeah.
But look, as the last topic area, I'm not sure how deep you want to get into this, but you talked a little bit about, and it seems every interview somewhere content creation comes up. I've had a lot of commentators on and whatnot, so and then my first guest was a content creator primarily in the CS space, so it certainly seems to be an area that a lot of people are now focusing on as commentators to like build the brand and the knowledge and the skill set and blah blah blah. Is there anything that like maybe we could expect to see from you, or are there still, you know, just the seeds of ideas that you still need to work on?
Yeah, it's seeds of ideas. You know, comedy has always been something that's been sort of part of, I beg your pardon, what I enjoy. So being able to make light of any like given situation.
Yeah.
So like kind of comedy skits based around like league stuff, what's going on. Obviously, we've kind of got quite a few limitations around well, the whole world stuff right now.
Yeah.
So it can put a bit of a damper, but you can still make content whilst you're at home, right? So it's not a crazy big deal. But you know, trying to stream more often is definitely the biggest thing for me. I think as someone that really enjoys open conversation in general, again, I think I've said it enough now. Like interaction with fans or people that just have the same interests as you. That's like a big deal for me. So I'll have to see. Like you rightfully said, seeds of ideas, I think, is the best way to put it. If something does come, like, because I don't necessarily want to have the same content line that loads of other content creators have, or whatever. I want whatever I do eventually think of to be unique. I don't want it to kind of be the same as everybody else's. So it's kind of weird / hard because, you know, we're so many years into people thinking of ideas and content. And hey, who knows? Maybe I just cave in and I do what everyone else does. But I've got to. I want to have like a USP, right? Like a unique selling point to my content. So I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, I wish you luck with it, but ultimately that is going to do us for the interview, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. Been a good sport. Absolute pleasure. I hope you enjoyed.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Jamada, boss man, on the mic, my guy. That's what we like to see. That is what we like to see. And super, super easy to work with and get a hold of. I thought after like at least a year of not talking to him that I might have to do, you know, a little bit more work or be a bit more patient with him, you know, to get him on and everything. But nah, man, I asked him. He was like, yeah, let's get it done. A couple days later, we were in. We were on. So really, really solid stuff. Appreciate that from him, of course. And I think pulling someone from a different game, you can learn an awful lot. Particularly if they're in a similar role to you. So, you know, if you are an aspiring commentator, color commentator, or coach, right, there's a lot there that you can pull from and learn from a different scene. So really, really intriguing to have him on. And again, I really, really want to thank him for coming on and being a good sport. Very charismatic guy, as you can tell. Funny man. And I wish him well moving forwards. I think he's going to do a great job. He's already made leaps and bounds since moving across into that kind of more solid commentary role. When I worked with him, as I mentioned in the interview, he was kind of trying to balance both. So, but now I think he's more solidly focusing on things there. But either way, you know the drill. Leave the like, drop the comment, drop the sub. You can also leave a comment. You don't necessarily have to drop one. But all the same, really, really solid stuff. I've got a few more ideas planned. ESEA Premier starting next week. I am a member of talent on that one. So I might do like an EU power ranking within the next day or so. and then see where we go from there. Maybe some analysis content, but we'll see. I've never really been a massive fan of that. But either way, as always, I appreciate your support. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.